The wildlife trade under scrutiny. The global pandemic has led to a debate on wet markets, where live animals are sold for food. So, should they be closed? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Scientists are still trying to confirm the exact source of the new coronavirus sweeping across the world. It's believed the virus may have jumped from exotic animals to humans at a market in Wuhan, China. That's led to growing calls to ban wet markets. Australia's agriculture minister wants the world's 20 richest nations, the G20, to back a scientific study. David Littleproud says these markets are a source of biosecurity and human health risks. And he says it'd be wrong to ignore wildlife wet markets in any assessment of how we can better manage those risks. Scientists and animal welfare activists are worried about the close contact between humans and live animals in wet markets. They're popular across Asia and other parts of the world for fresh meat and vegetables. Most of them don't sell exotic species. And since the start of the outbreak, China's government has banned the sale of wild animals, including bats. Its foreign ministry says Australia's call for an independent probe is political manoeuvring.
China has already enacted a comprehensive law to ban the hunting, trading, transportation and consumption of illegal wildlife. The agricultural goods markets and live poultry and seafood markets are not wildlife trading markets. It is illegal to sell wildlife in those markets, and they will be shut down and punished by law if found guilty of such illegal transactions.
The World Health Organization is calling for tighter regulation.
Wet markets, as you know, are an important source of affordable food and livelihood for millions of people all over the world. But in many places, they have been poorly regulated and poorly maintained. WHO's position is that when these markets are allowed to reopen, it should only be on the condition that they conform to stringent food safety and hygiene standards. Governments must rigorously enforce bans on the sale and trade of wildlife for food.
Let's introduce our panel. In the Vietnamese capital of Hanoi, we have Trinh Nguyen, an executive director at PanNature. In Lancaster, in the United Kingdom, Munir, a virologist at Lancaster University. And in Nairobi, Kenya, Kaddu Sebunya, the CEO at the African Wildlife Foundation. Welcome to you all. Mohammed, I'd like to begin with you first, because I'd like you to help us understand the science behind the risk of disease jumping from animals to humans in the environment of these live wet markets. I mean, lots of people go to zoos, for example. It doesn't seem to happen there. So what is happening in these markets?
Well, normally animals carry a range of different viruses, and those viruses are probably harmless for the animals. But they are staying there for a longer duration of time, and that's how they adopt. And whenever they get the chance to interact with a human or any other intermediate host, they have a potential to jump the species from animal to either intermediate animal or directly to the human. And if they do so, because human hasn't seen those infections before, we didn't have any immunity against that. That's how the virus have open ground to start replication and moving on. And when it comes to the wet market, this is a really great breeding ground for many of these viruses, because animals, those are kept in the wet market or in the open markets. These are the places where the viruses jump from one animal to another animal very frequently within a very confined environment. And that environment led the virus to identify a best and appropriate host where it can adopt even further and adopt at to the level that it can start infecting human.
Thank you very much for that. So, Kaddu, many of those animals that appear in these markets come from Africa are smuggled out of Africa. There have been decades-long campaigns against this. Why is this trade enduring?
Yeah, a number of issues here. One is that the demand is high, the price is high. Two, the sourcing countries, poverty is high. Management of this wildlife habitats is difficult. The laws are weak. Regulations are poor. Trafficking, that's the middle range, is common between countries. And the globalization, as the countries have become, the world has become so smaller, we've seen increased flights and interconnectedness. It has increased the trade. But I think the issue is more than that. We've been in this as my organization for a number of years. We've seen that where we have improved the connection between wildlife and the people that live with them, either gainfully through increasing their livelihoods in terms of income, or just a relationship, the drop in wildlife trade drops. Where we've seen the stop in demand, China, when China banned the trade in ivory last year, we saw a drop in the killing of elephants in Africa. So what we are looking at, a need to stop the demand, a need to stop the killing, the trafficking, and then the killing will stop.
And Nguyen, similarly in your part of the world, why is the trade in exotic animals continuing, and how do you stop it?
I think I agree with my colleagues. Is the profits from wildlife trade is the main driver for the ongoing global wildlife crime. The estimations of the profits from these illegal markets is about $7 to $23 billion US. We don't have the exact number because this is the black market, but it's sort of the third largest illegal markets after heroin, drug and armed trafficking. So that's the biggest driver. And the second reason I think is, I have to say, it's corruption, both from in the source country and also in the destination country, that allow the wildlife crime to operate. In the source country, the law enforcement may be not enough. And in the destination country, the control measure sometimes is not sufficient to deal with the complexity of the international wildlife crime.
Mohammed, these markets have been around for hundreds of years, but it only seems to be in recent times that we hear of these diseases jumping to humans, whether it's began with HIV in the late 50s, whether it's SARS, or whether it's H5N1. Why do they only seem to be happening now, or has it always been the case?
I think this has always been the case. Whenever there has been a close interaction between animal and human, and these animal doesn't need to be wild animal, even domesticated commercial animal, they pose almost the same risk. But since they are kept under a relatively cleaner environment, and we do understand the kind of viruses they infect to the livestock, they are vaccinated and they are protected. But in the wildlife, the risk is more because they are not protected against that. But I think one of the major contributing factor that is highlighting this phenomena a lot more now compared to past is that now we have developed technologies. Those are at the forefront to identify these unknown pathogens, the pathogens that haven't been identified in human. So we know from the past history that more than 60% of the infection in human came from animal. And those majority of those 60% have been very recently identified. And that is because we developed technologies such as next generation sequencing approaches which identify any kind of pathogens, whether it causes disease or does not cause disease, can be identified. So because of this advancement, our knowledge is getting more and more advanced. And whenever such situations such as COVID-19 arises, our first hit point is to look whether it has come from animals.
Kaddu, in Africa, meat from some exotic animals tends to be known as bush meat, and you've had disease appear from, as I say, from HIV from the Congo in the late 50s. Ebola also originated from animals. Is there an education issue in getting people to understand where these diseases are emerging from in those communities?
No, they do, but a number of things have happened. Traditionally and for many years, African communities have been living with wildlife for generations and consuming it as such. But I think what has happened is the trade in wildlife and the markets you are talking about. But also, before actually I go, I want to qualify that the wet markets, as I've been reading in Western media, are really defined differently. The wet markets in Africa are what you call in London farmers' markets.
Yes.
These are just farm produce. So that we need to be careful the way we use the words. I've had a banning wet markets. But to your point, when Africans in rural areas moved to urban areas and went with the idea that they need to continue consuming bushmeat, it demanded that people needed to catch wildlife, mix it up, either cage it and take it to the market, which was not done traditionally like that. So the trade itself is where the problem is. The trade, how it's traded, how it's transported, the mix of wildlife is where the challenges have been, and that's where we are having this problem. It doesn't mean that bushmeat is legal in Africa. Actually, it's not in many countries. There are species that are illegally and you can't consume them, but there are species that are illegally consumed in the markets. So there is a difference there. But yes, I come from Uganda, and Ebola was a very, very serious issue there. It hit the country a couple of years ago, and it came from consuming primates in Central Africa. And it was transferred to Uganda, and a lot of people died over that. There is enough knowledge that this is a serious issue in Africa, but it's the demand for meat, demand for foreign international markets that has brought this issue to bear, and this is where we found ourselves.
Nguyen, your organisation has teamed up with 9 others in Vietnam and written to your Prime Minister to ask him to legislate against markets selling wildlife. It's been a problem in your part of the world for decades. What's prompted the Prime Minister to pay attention this time?
I think there's increasing media coverage and scientific evidence about the link between wildlife trade and these disease outbreaks, and also Vietnam has been hotspots of wildlife trade, not because we sell wildlife to other countries, but also in recent years, Vietnam becoming a transit place for international wildlife product, and Vietnam has been featured in international media in a negative ways because of that. So when 14 conservation organizations brought up the agreement and approached the governments on how to deal with the situation of the COVID-19 or relating to wildlife. And it is really good that the government was very responsive, and the Prime Minister already asked his agency to prepare legislative directives to deal with wildlife problem in Vietnam.
Munir, is it the way forward to ban the sale of wildlife in these markets?
I think nowadays the interface between animal and human has been intensified significantly. For example, with urbanization, with international travel, environmental factor, global warming, that is bringing animal very close to the human. Any legislation that can interfere with this interface between human and animal would certainly help to reduce the risk for the viruses to jump from animal to human. And that could be not only just in the developing world, which are being described several factors, but also in the developed world where products from wild animal are being sold on a very high prices. So the effort has to be scaled from developing world toward the developed world, and from cosmetic to the other industries where any products are being used. So certainly the effort has to be made at multi-scaled before any significant benefit would be visible.
Kaddu, we've seen in Africa tourism evaporate because of the ban on travel because of coronavirus. Are you now, in fact, facing more risk of poaching and trading in these animals because people have no other income?
Absolutely, and that's our biggest worry now, is the spike in poaching for a number of reasons. As the countries have locked down, the tourism is upset in the national parks. Remember, when the tourists are present in the parks, there is human presence in many places in the park. Some of African parks are larger than many countries in Europe and elsewhere. So these are big landscapes. With the presence of tourism, it increases human eye in many of these areas, and poaching decreases. Revenue from tourism, obviously, is the direct income for many of these national parks. It went to zero overnight. The parks have no revenues. Yesterday, I had a meeting with 30 park executive managers across the continent. They are telling me they have run out of money to do patrols. They are worried that as countries have locked down, as rural economies are collapsing, people are going to turn to wildlife for protein. And that is going to be, so it's not only the big five, the elephants, the rhinos we've been worried about. It's going to be now the small mammals that people are going to start consuming. The other small point is that, point related to tourism, is that it employs more than 24 million Africans on the continent. If you look at the value chain too, 3 million directly in the industry itself. But it supports GDP of the countries where we work to the level of about between 8 to 13% GDP. So it's a big hole to the economies of Africa, but directly to the national park and the areas where we work. It has hit the national park services. It has hit the communities that depend on the tourists in their areas. It has hit the value chain, transporters, restaurant owners, folks you see at the airport, ticketing agencies, and all those folks are going to suffer, and that has implications for rural economies. The issue really is rural economies. The extended family issue in Africa, there are no safety nets. A lot of the folks in rural areas near national parks, many times depend on urban relatives who send money to rural areas. They have no jobs today. So the rural economies are collapsing. So not only tourism.
Nguyen, one of the problems I know in your part of the world has been the idea that the more exotic the animal, the higher the prestige is in eating it. Do you think this outbreak of coronavirus will finally get the message home to people that it is not okay to eat these rare, endangered animals, or will that culture still persist?
Well, ourselves and many conservation organizations hope that to happen. But from the lesson of SARS outbreak, when there was also scientific evidence about the link between wildlife and the SARS outbreak, then after some time, the markets came back normal. People seem having very short memory about what happened, or maybe we don't push enough in terms of public information, raising public awareness. So this time we try to take the opportunity to push as much as information to the public and to the government agency, and trying to capture this moment, this time to advocate for the wildlife trade ban, and also to educate the public that yes, significant risk, human life and the economy. We all see that. But on the other hand, we also afraid that maybe after the outbreak is over, when everything come back normal, then if there is not enough enforcement measure, that enough national and also international control policy over the wildlife trade, it will continue to happen.
Mohammed, I almost hesitate to ask, but because we're a long way to go before we even control the coronavirus. But is that where our next pandemic is coming from? Another market coming from another transfer from an animal to a human in another market? Is that where the future is?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's hope that doesn't happen. But in the current situation, if we look really what are the recent emerging infections, majority of those have direct or indirect link with wild animal. So I wouldn't be extremely surprised if the next pandemic would be because of jumping of the animals, of the pathogens from animal to human. And that is really tricky in the current situations to really make a strong legislation to ban the usage of the bushmeat and other products, mainly because the overall utilization of meat and the association of human with the animal has been deep-rooted culturally, at some places religiously, and then because of the need of the poverty. So probably I just want to reinforce onto the fact that this is a great time to reinforce once again how legislation need to be made to ensure that this interaction and the interface between human and animal will be minimized.
And Kaddu, apparently in the markets of Gabon in West Africa, the Chinese buyers of pangolin, the most trafficked animal, they've evaporated now, it seems. Are they going to come back, or is there a chance that this trade has really been interrupted by the scare from the coronavirus?
Yes, I think there's a huge chance that some of the species are going to be helped by the pandemic. And remember that the trade in pangolin was already illegal. And that's why I worry on the insistence of banning things. We've banned a lot of things, but we haven't got the good results we wanted. But yes, there will be a fear. This is an opportunity for us to increase the awareness. But we need to be fully informed by the needs of the people, communities, and the institutions on the front line to address this complex issue. Protecting sustainable development in African countries should be the center of this debate. Alternatives and different options for people.
But so you think now is the right time, now there is a chance to really interrupt this trade from Africa to Asia?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we are at it. There are three things we are working on. One is this is a huge opportunity for Africa to stop this world trade. This is not only because of the virus, but it's also our heritage too, these animals. I know a number of Africans that belong to the clan of pangolin. This is their heritage, and this is their clans, and they need to protect this. It's just the commerce and the trade that has really linked it. The second thing is really looking at the model of the new development model we need. That takes care of biodiversity and streamlines biodiversity into our economic development aspirations.
Okay, and very quickly, with you, Nguyen, as well, from your perspective, is this an opportunity, a serious opportunity, you think, now to really interrupt the trade in exotic animals?
Yeah, I do believe. That's why we are working with other conservation partners and also the government, trying to push for more strict control over the trade, and also bans of not only the trade, also the consumption of wildlife. All
right, Nguyen, thank you very much. Unfortunately, gentlemen, we're out of time, but thank you very much for your insights. Thanks to Trinh Lee Nguyen, Dr. Mohammed Munir and Kaddu Sebunya, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.